I think some
Can
person
start
is
now. You,
using
you
iPhone, so better to rename.
Hmm?
iPhone, can you rename so that we'll know the identity bus?
iPhone is not mine. Phone.
I'm saying the iPhone can be renamed. Firoz, can you make him
I've
admin
given
of
the permission, sir. I've given the permission. They can change their name.
Okay.
Now it is live streaming. We can start the call.
Okay. Let us start with colonial diaspora. That is the Armenian and Chinese diasporas in India. This is a unit number 79. Let us start with the impact of colonialism on human migration. Before we start with the role of colonialism in human migration, can anyone in the, I don't know how many of us are there. Anishka, you are there, right? Anishka, you are there? Okay, let us start with colonialism. What is colonialism? It refers to the practice or policy of a country extending its control over another territory, often by establishing settlements, exploiting resources, and asserting political, economical, and cultural dominance. So that is what is called colonialism. Colonialism refers to the practice or policy of a country extending its control over another territory, often by establishing settlements, exploiting resources, and asserting political, economic, and cultural dominance. This system typically involves the subjugation and domination of indigenous population by a foreign power. So that's the whole definition about colonialism. It has basically colonialism has a profound impact on human migration, even in shaping the patterns of the movement across the world. Like European powers during their colonization of large areas in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, created new migration flows through forced labors, trade, and settlements, all those things. So that is what exactly is what we are going to discuss now. The role of colonialism in human migration. Now, before that, let me understand who knows the difference between forced migration and slavery. Is there anyone who can tell me what is forced labor and slavery? Difference between forced labor and slavery. Anishka, you are there or you're not there? It looks like we have very less participation, right? Who is this iPhone 8,
You can
please?
go ahead, Ranju. in case in case they are not able to respond. You can go ahead.
Okay. Forced migration and slavery. How is it affecting us? This is something which we'll, we will examine in detail. During the transitional transatlantic slave trade, that's between the 16th and 19th century, European colonial powers, mainly the Portuguese, British, Spain, and France, forcefully transported over 12 million Africans to Americas, primarily to work in plantations. This resulted in forced displacement. This is called forced migration too. This resulted in forced displacement of Africans across the Atlantic, significantly affecting the demographics of America. For example, African slaves were taken to places like Caribbean, Brazil, and south of United States, contributed to the formation of Afro-descendant communities in that region. Then in the last session, we have discussed about the indentured labor during the British colonies after the abolition of slavery in 19th century. The British Empire encouraged migration from India and China to work as indentured laborers in their colonies. These migrants, what happened, had signed contracts to work for a certain period. Typically, it was something around 5 to 10 years in exchange of passage to colonies and the promise of land or money at the end of their service. So what they did is that during those periods, they signed a contract. The contract was not like now for a year or two, it was around for 5 to 10 years. And in exchange for passage, they were offered at the end of the contract, they will have a passage to other colonies and the promise of land or money. Either the land or money will be promised at the end of their services. Example, if we give you an example, it will be like Indian indentured laborers who were transported to place like Guyana, Mauritius, and even Fiji, where they worked on sugarcane plantations. And their descendants make up significant portions of the population in these countries even till today. That means they were given land and money in promise, in the offer of their services as indentured laborers. And settlement and colonization. European colonial powers actively encouraged their citizens to migrate to newly discovered lands, especially in the Americas and Australia. This led to the creation of settler colonies where European settlers displaced or assimilated indigenous population. This is very important. The European settlement in America and Australia led to the creation of settler colonies where European settlers displaced or assimilated indigenous population. So the original population was being displaced because of these settlers. For example, the British colonization of Australia involved the settlement of convicts and free settlers were displaced indigenous Aboriginal population. This is called Aboriginal populations and led to the democratic shift in that region. Similarly, when European settlers in North America and South America played a role in displacement of Native American population. So these are some examples of settlement and colonization. Urbanization and migration to port cities. Migration to colonial trading hubs. Most of the trading hubs during those periods were the ports. Ports had been the trading hubs. So colonial powers established port cities as hubs for trade and commerce. These cities attracted migrants from rural areas. within the colonies as well as from other parts of the empire, leading to significant urbanization. So the trade and commerce, they were mostly influenced by the trade and commerce, and it was established in port cities, which led to significant urbanization. For example, during British rule in Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai, it became an economic activity attracting migrants from surrounding regions. Similarly, in Africa, like cities like Lagos in Nigeria, Nairobi in Kenya, saw migrations due to colonial trade activities and the establishment of colonial administrations too. And in the post-colonial migration, that is migration from former colonies to the colonial powers, what happened? The migration during this period, after the decolonization of many countries in the mid of 20th century, migration continued as people moved to former colonial powers in search of better opportunities, often in response to political instability or economic hardship in post-colonial nations. So, what happened during the post-colonial uh, period in the post-colonial nations? Many of them, they tried to migrate or they continued migrating to their colonial powers, and then they searched for better opportunities, often in response to the political instability of the former colonial areas. For example, after India gained independence in 1947, many Indians migrated to Britain for employment and education opportunities, a trend that continued throughout till 1960s, even now also to an extent. Similarly, after the end of British colonial rule in Kenya, many Kenyans of Indian descent moved to UK, leading to establishment of a significant Kenyan Indian diaspora there, which is very important. So, this Kenyan Indian diaspora was formed due to the migration of Indians in Kenya who had already migrated during the colonial times, and from there, after the post-colonial time, they migrated back to their colonial powers like British, with UK, and they settled over there, making a Kenyan Indian diaspora there. So that's the role of colonialism in human migration. Is there anyone to ask questions?
No, sir.
Ah, you are there, Anushka. I was calling you before.
Sir, actually, there was some problem with the mic.
No issues, Anushka. Armenian trade diaspora and colonialism. We will go to Armenian trade diaspora and colonialism. Armenian trade diaspora and colonialism. Armenian trade diaspora. Basically, Armenian people started coming to India somewhere in the 17th century, and they were very successful merchants. The key trading hubs for them were like Surat, Agra, and Kolkata. They traded goods like textiles, spices, and precious metals across the Indian Ocean and the Persian Gulf. So these are the main trades what Armenian diaspora was doing in India when they flourished in the 17th century. What is the impact of colonial powers? Faced stiff in competition from the British, French, Dutch, and Portuguese colonial powers in the 18th century. Unlike colonial powers, Armenians operated independently without state-backed companies like British East India Company. This is something which is very important for you to understand. The Armenian diaspora, they operated what they operated. They operated their trade between India and even other countries independently without state-backed companies. There was no support of the government there or the state government there. And like the other countries like British East India companies and all. What was the adaptation and contribution of Armenians? Armenians developed survival mechanism to adapt to colonial pressures. Despite suppression, they continued significantly to India's economic landscape through trade and commerce. Example, Armenians in Calcutta established a successful business and cultural institutions, leaving a lasting legacy. So Armenia has a lot of things. Armenian people, a lot of Armenian settlements can be seen in Calcutta. They have a big church even there in Calcutta, which shows their established uh, business with India during those times. What was the challenges and suppressions? They were subjected to unfair practices such as piracy and confiscations, like the Santa Carina incident, where the Santa Carina incident is that an American ship uh, seized by the Admiral Garfin of the British East India Company, and then the ship was carrying silver and valuables falsely accused for belonging to the French. Then a legal battle started between them and ensured around 1752, ending in favor of the British, which was actually not to be in favor of British. So those are incidents those are the challenges and those are the incidents that happened for the Armenian diaspora during their trade with India during the colonial times. There were before going to the next part, can anyone tell me how colonialism expands trade in diaspora? Having said all these things, there are ways that colonialism expanded trade diaspora. Anishka or anybody can give me an answer, please.
I think colonialism was based on trade, and the people who went outside India and the people who came into the India as diaspora, they basically, what can I say, emphasize on the trade thing. Matlab, they were using these things of uh, British manufactured, and then they took those things to their country. And as same, I think, I mean, I'm not sure about this.
Okay, fine. I'll tell you. Colonialism expanded trade diaspora in many ways. Number one, they made new trade routes, like they established extensive trade routes connecting distant markets across continents, like Armenia coming to Calcutta, and enabling diasporic communities to expand their networks. The another thing is that economic hubs. Colonies become major economic hubs like Kolkata, Bombay, attracting diasporic merchants who are seeking new business opportunities. Also, the access to resources. Colonial powers exploited local resources, creating new goods and market that diasporic traders could access and distribute globally. Also, we can say that the migration encouragement, the administrations of colonial administrations often encourage skilled merchants like Armenians to settle in their territories to boost local economies. So those are the ways. Also, you can say that there is a cultural and commercial exchange. Like colonies served as melting pots for cultural and economic exchange when diasporic communities introduce new products and trade practices. Also, legal framework. Colonial governments, normally, all colonial governments provided, even though strict, a very good legal structure, unbiased, that facilitated trade, allowing diasporas to operate within an established system. So these are certain things that colonialism had resulted in expanding the trade diasporas. Now we will go into Armenian settlement in India, the key places and timelines. Surat during the 16th century. Armenians first arrived in Surat, Gujarat. It is a major port city for international trade. They become influential in the textile and spice trade. So they were doing the textile and spice trade in Surat. And in the same time, during the 16th century, they came in Agra also, and that during the Mughal period as well, and engaged in trade and building one of the earliest Armenian churches there. Then they came to Kolkata in 17th century, where Armenians established a strong presence in Calcutta with significant contributions to trade and infrastructure. The Armenian Church of St. Nazareth was built in 1707, one of the oldest Christian churches in the city. Then during the 17th century, they came to Chennai, become prominent merchants, helping to establish city trade links with Southeast Asian countries. And then in 18th century, they reached Mumbai. Armenians also settled in Mumbai, exchanging commercial and establishing themselves in the city, vibrant trading scenes. Even all this country, in all these places, till now, you can see Armenian Indians or Armenian trades still being, the olden trades, the way they flourished, they still hold back, like the church in St. Nazareth Church in Calcutta. There are certain areas in Agra where Armenians have their own, their own settlements. There are places in Chennai towards the Port Mylapore areas, down to the Mylapore areas where Armenians are still there. Even in Mumbai, there are a lot of places where Armenians are still there. So this is the impact. This was the impact of the colonialism encouraging Armenian diaspora to have trade in India. Now we will go back to Armenian Commercial Intelligence Network. What is, can anyone tell me what is this Commercial Intelligence Network? Armenians are well known for it. Armenia has a very good commercial intelligence network. This is what we have studied in history way back. And even in many other areas, we always mention that Americans have, Armenians have a very good commercial intelligence network. What is it? Anushka, do you know about it?
No, sir. I mean, I might have read it. Now I don't recall it.
Okay. Commercial intelligence network basically refers to the sophisticated and widespread trade, communication, and information system gathered by the Armenian merchants and traders and developed that one during the medieval and the early modern period. That means wherever they had gone, for example, Armenians As I told you before, Armenian diaspora has engaged in trade, not backed up by any other companies, state-owned companies. So it is an independent group of people uh, doing the trade or doing trade with other countries. When a group of people are doing trade, what they used to do that if an Armenian is going to explore a trade link in Kolkata, they used to make very clear that what are the hurdles they face, how to navigate those hurdles, how to reach those areas, whom to be in touch with in Calcutta, what you have to do in Calcutta, what you can get in Calcutta, those kind of things. If some group explores it, they make that one very clearly, clearly spread or informed within the Armenian groups in their country. There, they brought in a kind of, uh, they have, we can say that they developed that informations, they gathered those informations, and they keep those informations as their way of communication. So that's what we call Armenian commercial intelligence. So what are the key features of it? Strategic locations. Armenians established trade colonies and settlements in key commercial hubs, including cities like Silk Road, the Levant, Persia, India, Europe. These locations allowed them to act as intermediaries in trade of silk, spices, textiles, and other valuable goods. So they had made themselves that with their commercial intelligence network, the main feature of it was that they established it as a strategic locations. Cultural and linguistic adaptability. Armenian merchants were often known for their ability to adapt to different cultures and languages, which enabled them to establish strong trade relations with diverse partners. Their multilingual abilities and knowledge of local customs were critical to their success. Their multilingual abilities, this is something which we have to note, their multilingual abilities and knowledge of local customs were critical to their success. Then it comes the family and community ties. The network relied heavily on family connections and trusted community members. This is what we have explained just before, that since they are not backed up by uh, any government companies, they worked in group, they worked in families, and they have a very good network between the family and the communities. And these ties ensured that this kind of a relationship ensured the reliability and security of informations and goods being transported across long distances. This is a very important reason. The family and community ties, the way they work, ensure the reliability and security of informations and goods being transported across long distances. Then it comes is the information exchange. The Armenian traders maintained a robust system of communications, using letters and messengers to exchange informations about market conditions, the prices, and even political developments in the country where they trade. This allowed them to make informed decisions and mitigate risk in the commercial avenues or ventures. So Armenian traders, they maintain a robust system of communication using letters and messages to exchange informations about market conditions, prices, and even political developments. Now, Armenian merchant diaspora. The Armenian merchant diaspora, scattered across many regions, was interconnected through shared heritage and trust. This is something which we have to underline and see. The Armenian merchant diaspora, scattered across many regions, was interconnected through shared heritage and trust. This diaspora played a pivotal role in dissemination of commercial intelligence and maintenance of trade routes. They had been helping in the maintenance of the trade routes and updating their commercial intelligence network. Partnership with local authorities. Armenian traders, they often aligns with the local rulers and authorities, securing favorable trade terms and protections. These relationships were mutually beneficial as they provided the traders with security and the authority with access to valuable trade networks. So the relationship which they maintained with the rulers and authorities of their trading countries often helped them to secure trade terms and protection in their favor. Financial acumen. Armenians were skilled in various aspects of finance, including money lending, credit arrangements, and investment. This financial expertise complemented their trading activities and continued their commercial success in all the countries where they had established trade relationships. Is there anything that anyone wants to know? Any questions, please?
No, sir.
This is a very easy subject. We will only go through Armenian and Chinese migration, and then we will see. Now we go to Chinese migration and settlement in India. The wave of Chinese migration started early in the 19th century, where the key place was Kochi and Malabar. Malabar is now Malappuram, the coastal area. Both are coastal areas, where early Chinese traders and settlers, they arrived in these places and established trade links with the local population. Then what happened there, that region had established maritime routes for trading silk, spices, and other goods with Chinese people. And during the mid 1800s, that is 1830 to 1860, they migrated to places like Calcutta, Mumbai, and again to Cochin. Here in Calcutta, they became a primary destination for Chinese traders due to the port and British colonial influence. So Chinese has established a good hub in Calcutta because it's a port and it has a colonial influence from the British colonial influence too. The influx of Chinese merchants and artisans started to form a community, especially in the city's Chinatown, which still exists in Kolkata. Okay, there is Chinatown still. And down in Bombay, what they did was that they saw an increase in traders during this time and even workers, and many were being involved during that time in opium trade. And in Cochin, became a hub for Chinese for trade and commerce of spices from India. And then in the late 19th century, they again came to Calcutta. A fresh lot came from Calcutta, Mumbai, and this time they have gone to Darjeeling, Simla, and all. This is to the Tibetan borders, where this community, this Chinese community that came to Calcutta, established itself as a part of city's social and economic landscape, where that is how this Chinese town, Chinatown, and all came in. And then in Bombay, the Chinese immigrants, various various business ventures, particularly in textiles and manufacturing industries. In Darjeeling, Chinese migrants began to settle there, with many of them involved in tea plantations and trading. The Chinese food and culture also started to emerge in the hill station by then. And then Simla, the colonial hill station, started Chinese migrants employed in service industries. So that is what happened during the 19th century. During the early 20th century, we have again Calcutta, Mumbai, Darjeeling, Simla, and here addition is Delhi. So in Delhi, what happened, although not so prominent as the other cities, some Chinese migrants began to settle in Delhi as well as during this period uh, to work in trade and services. There also it was trade and services, and they were having a very good connectivity with Simla and Darjeeling. So these are the wave of Chinese migration in India. Social status of Chinese diaspora in India. You know, the Chinese diaspora in India is relatively small, but historically, historically we can say that it's a significant community with its root tracing back, as we have seen earlier, to 18th centuries. The majority of the Chinese in India are concentrated somewhere in Calcutta, with a smaller community in Mumbai, Delhi, and even Pune also. So let us see what is the social status of the community, cultural identity, and language. The Chinese community in India has maintained its unique cultural identity, often preserving traditions, language, and customs despite being a small minority. Many Chinese people in India speak a dialect of Chinese such as Hakka, although younger generation often speak Hindi, Bengali, or English. Festivals like Chinese New Year and what you call this Dragon Boat festivals are celebrated, and Chinese cuisines has become more popular across India, especially in urban areas. If we still used to go to Chinese restaurants, Chinese noodles, Hakka noodles. Hakka is a dialect. However, those people are very good in making the specific noodles. Then the integration and social challenges. Despite their long-standing presence, the Chinese diaspora has faced challenges related to social integration, like the anti-Chinese sentiment was particularly strong during the Sino-Indian War of 1962, leading to suspicion and discrimination against the Chinese community. Some members were you know, even interned, and many lost their property during this time. Over a period of time, however, the community has gradually reintegrated, but remnants of historical prejudice uh, out of that Sino-American War, sorry, Sino-Indian War, still exist. What are the religious practices? The community is predominantly Buddhist, with some practice in Christianity and Taoism. Also, the religious practices of Chinese diaspora are largely aligned with the general religious diversities in India. This is something which we have to keep in mind. The religious practices of the Chinese diaspora are largely aligned with the general religious diversity in India. Anything? Any questions?
No, sir.
Now we'll go to the economic status of Chinese diaspora in India. Number one is the business and trade. The economic contribution of Chinese diaspora in India has been substantial, particularly in trade, manufacturing, and hospitality. Many Chinese families have been involved in manufacturing sectors, including, say, this production of small goods, textiles, and later in the restaurant businesses. In Calcutta, for example, the Chinese community was historically engaged uh, in uh, in production of leather goods, food processing, and other similar industries. So they had they had been in diversified fields, even though they are in a small community. Chinese restaurants. One of the most notable economic contribution of Chinese diaspora is its role in popularizing Chinese cuisine in India. This Chinese food has become a more or less an integral part of the urban culinary culture, particularly Indian Chinese cuisines, which blends traditional, Chinese dishes with Indian flavors. Many Chinese-owned restaurants have prospered, creating a substantial economic footprint in cities like Kolkata, Mumbai, and even Delhi also. So that is the one of the notable economic contributions, the Chinese restaurant. Number three is the business migration. Like some members of the Chinese diaspora in India have also migrated for business opportunities, often establishing connections between India and China. However, what was the drawback is that political tension and trade issues between the two countries, between China and India, have impacted the business over time, especially in recent years, with the growing anti-China sentiment in India. With the growing anti-China sentiment in India. So that is the drawback of this business migration, the political tensions and the trade issues between the two countries have impacted their business over time. Economic marginalization. Despite the community's contribution to trade and industry, many Chinese in India face economic marginalization. This is because they often occupy something like small scale businesses rather than holding large corporate positions. The community remains economically diverse, uh, with some achieving significant wealth, while others continue to live in modest circumstances. So, the small scale business, rather than holding the corporate firms, was one of the reasons of getting commercially marginalized, or sorry, economically marginalized. Education and occupation. The Chinese diaspora normally place a strong emphasis on education. Members of the members of the community have been involved in a range of professions, including say, teaching, even in healthcare, business, obviously. However, the community has faced difficulties in achieving higher representations in the formal sectors of the economy due to their small size and the social bias they face. So the achievement of higher representation in formal sectors of the economy was marginalized due to their small size and the social bias, the normal social bias they faced in within the Indian community. Anything from this section?
No, sir.
We'll go to the next section. Indo-China War, the Galwan Valley, and the Chinese tourist migrants. Indo-China War happened in 1962. So the Indo-China War, also known as the Sino-Indian War, took place in 1962 and was a brief but intense military conflict between India and China. The war was primarily triggered, it was triggered by border disputes, particularly in the Akshan-Chin region and the northeast frontier region. Now that region is called Arunachal Pradesh. The war did end in a decisive victory for China, which gained control over the Akshan-Chin area, and area of strategic importance due to its proximity to Tibet. Then the conflict left, lasting tensions between the two nations and shaped India's defense and foreign policies for decades. So it is always that the Indo-China War had a profound impact on India, shaping its defense and foreign policies for decades. Then the Galwan Valley clash that happened in 2020, located in the Galwan Valley, is located in the Ladakh region along the line of actual control, became a focal point of a renewed military standoff between India and China. It was in June 2020, some violent clashes occurred between Indian and Chinese troops in that valley, marking the first fatalities in that area in nearly over 4 decades. The confrontation was triggered by disputes over the border alignment and territorial claims. The clash led to the death of 20 Indian soldiers and an unknown number of Chinese casualties. This event subsequently or significantly escalated tension between the two countries and sparked renewed discussion about India's security and defense strategies in that region. The Chinese tourist migrants in India. This is something which you should know. What is Chinese tourist migrants? We have Chinese migrants. Here it is tourist migrant. Refers to the Chinese diaspora in India that had to undergo migration twice due to political and historical situation, which means the first migration occurred during British colonial period when Chinese people from various regions, especially what we said before, Hakka, Kantun areas, settled in India for trade and business purpose. And then many of them established themselves in cities like Calcutta, where they thrived in industries like leather, textiles, restaurants, and all those things. That was the first migration. However, the second migration took place in 1962 Indo-China War when anti-Chinese sentiments surged in India. Following the war, what happened? Many of these first migrants of Chinese people, diaspora, in India faced suspicion and then their properties were confiscated, etc. This prompted a significant number of Chinese Indians to migrate again, primarily to countries like Taiwan or Hong Kong or some other Southeast Asian countries in search of a more safer and more stable environment. This community, which had initially migrated to India for economic opportunities, was forced to adapt new circumstances, leading to the phenomenon of twice management. Anything on it?
No, sir.
Now we will go on to key challenges faced by Armenian and Chinese diaspora. Okay, what are the key challenges faced by Armenian diaspora? Uh, one of the key one is the cultural integration. Armenians in India are relatively small community, and over time, their distinct cultural practices and language have become less prominent. Maintaining cultural heritage while integrating into mainstream Indian society remains a challenge for them. For example, uh, the Armenian community in India is historically concentrated in cities like, as I told you, Kolkata, Chennai. And in these places, what they did was that they established churches, schools, and even business. However, over a period of time, mainly of their descendants have integrated into the mainstream of Indian society, with some even adopting Indian customs, languages, and even lifestyles. The younger generations, that is the new generations, especially those who grew in India, may find customs and languages and lifestyles of the original Armenian to be retained. However, the cultural identity will be at large for those new generations. This has led to a loss of their distinct practices in in the of their culture in India. So that is what is called cultural integration. Uh, there was a there was a case study on this one in Kolkata. The Armenian Church of the Holy Son Nazareth and other community organizations once served as hubs for cultural and social life. Today, these institutions face declining membership, and even the younger Armenians often don't go to these churches and potentially diluting their Armenian identity with Indian culture. So there was a case study on this one. I don't know who did this case study, but I have gone through this case study. When it was very interesting. I mean, if you get through this one, you can go through it. You will understand how a diaspora over a period of time get aligned to the society in which they had been living for years together, by which they tend to forget the identity, their original identity of what they are, uh, by uh, by by virtue of their descents. So that is one thing. Number two is language preservation. Armenia is not widely spoken in India, and younger generation may lose touch with their ancestral language. So the lack of formal institutions to promote the language of Armenia contributes to this kind of an issue. The the example for this will be like, uh, for instance, like elderly members of a community of Armenian community in Kolkata still speak Armenia and a mix of Armenian English, while the younger generation often speaks Hindi and English or a mixture of both. So schools that once taught Armenian, though few, had declined. There is hardly any Armenian schools now to be seen in India. The the generation gap. older generations of Armenians who came to India during colonial times, particularly in Calcutta and Bombay, may find it difficult to connect with younger generations. So what does it mean? It means that older generations of Armenians, that's the generations of Armenians during the initial period of their coming from Armenia and getting settled in Indian societies. Those people and the new Armenians who had been here, who had born and brought up in India, find it difficult to connect each other and might identify more strongly. The new generation might get identified more strongly as an Indian culture, born or with Armenian roots of Indian culture rather than a pure Armenian. So that's the cultural gap. That's the generation gap. That, for example, the original American settlers in India mostly involved with trade and business. Uh, so so what happened is that especially especially they settled in Calcutta and Mumbai, over these decades, the descendants have often moved to different sectors of employment. However, the connection of their Armenian roots is often weaker in younger generations. This is the main issue which we are facing here now. What is limited political representation? With small numbers, Armenians in India lack substantial political representation or influence. This is something which we should understand. Like a small community, like Armenians in India, have very little political influence because their community is very less. They have no major political figures in India, and often it is very difficult for them to advocate their community needs. That is another challenge the Armenian diaspora has faced in India. We have also some case studies being done on this one for the lack of political representation, making it difficult for Armenian community in India to push for support to the culture and religious institutions, or to address issues that disappropriately affect them, such as the preservation and heritage of sites. Is there anything which you would like to know from here?
News.
Can you hear me? Now we will go to challenges faced by the Chinese diaspora. One basic challenge which they face is the geopolitical tensions. The Chinese communities in India, they face difficulties due to strained political relations between India and China, particularly following the border issues. For example, that ongoing tensions between India and China have affected the Chinese community in India, right? Also, during periods of heightened political tensions, Chinese origin business and individuals were often having higher scrutiny as they were often taken hostile by Indian governments. So that is the geopolitical tensions that is the challenge that were faced by Chinese diaspora, and also the identity crisis. When we say about identity crisis, we should understand that the Chinese diaspora in India often struggles with questions of their identity. Because for some of the members of this Chinese community, navigating between their ethnic roots and their Indian identity can be challenging, especially in light of nationalistic sentiments and that may question their loyalty or belongings to the country. Moreover, the tensions between these identities can lead to a sense of belonging neither entirely to India nor to China. So that is another issue which Chinese diaspora has. The tensions between China and India often leads to a sense of belonging neither to India or to nor to China. Then we come to the economic struggles. Many of these Chinese communities in India historically who worked in business, such as restaurants, food processing, and small-scale manufacturing. While the changing of the economic dynamics or competition has increased, what happened is that the community has faced challenges in adapting to new business models or employment sectors. For example, uh, the Chinese community in India has historically been involved in food-related business, right? Most of them were on food-related business. However, when competition has increased and changes in consumer preference happened, many business owned by the Chinese had faced challenges, including scaling down, or they started shifting into new cuisines like Chinese Indian flavors cuisines, so on and so forth. So this is the main economic struggles what happened with Chinese diaspora. Stereotyping and discrimination. What is stereotyping? Anyone can tell me what is stereotyping? These Chinese people, Chinese diaspora in India, sometimes stereotyped as foreigners or outsiders, despite having lived in India for generations. But the difference between Chinese and Armenian diaspora is that Armenians who had lived in India, especially in Bombay and Pune and all, we have seen the Indian community taking them or accepting them as Indian community, not as Armenian communities. But Chinese people, they often been stereotyped as foreigners or outsiders, even though they had been living with in our country for generations. So this what happens that it leads to experience of discriminations, especially when these anti-China sentiments flare up, especially when there is a problem in the borders or there is economic tension, the political tensions between India and China. Such kind of discriminations get flared up. There was also a kind of case study being done in 2021 on why Chinese diaspora was not considered as Indians after being here for decades. Even the diaspora's fourth generation, which was born with the Indian society, never get along or never get gelled up with Indian society. There was a case study done, and this case study was done somewhere from a university in Northeast. If I'm not wrong, it was done by a Northeast University, Shillong or Assam, and they were focusing mostly on this Chinese diaspora in Darjeeling areas. So those are the basic challenges which the Chinese diaspora has faced in getting themselves in India. However, there is something which we should know, that the Armenian and Chinese communities, both, even though they face challenges, have significant contributions to the country's culture and economy, and even the history. Their experience highlights many border issues faced by the diaspora communities, like balancing cultural preservations and integrating themselves into the host society, etc. So the details, the details of how they survive with the Indian community as a larger study needs to be done. A larger study has need to be done to understand, and it will be, and we will try to highlight in the next slides, coming slides. Anything more? Anything else to be added here?
No, sir.
And can you tell me one thing? What now we have seen the challenges of Chinese diaspora, and we have seen the challenges of Armenian diaspora, right? Anshika,
Yes, sir.
so according to you, what did you understand? What are the similarities and what are the differences?
So the challenges were quite same, like the identity crisis, economic struggles. Although Armenians have a very nice, structured, what you said, a trading intelligence network, but other than that, they have faced language and cultural identity and the discrimination. So the challenges were quite similar.
The challenges are quite similar, right? Both the Armenians and the Chinese diaspora, the challenges are quite similar. Okay, agreed. Anything else? Like uh, when you see that both challenges are quite similar, what do you think? Whether is it the Chinese diaspora or the Armenian diaspora got more gelled with Indian people and Indian culture?
I think Armenians were more influenced with Indian culture.
Armenians, right?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any reason for that?
That because I think Chinese people very much followed their own culture, and they very few places they intake the Indian culture. Like in cuisine, they might add some spices in their cuisines, but they never adopt it and they never get influenced with our culture. I think so.
Yes, it is correct. It is absolutely correct. Now we will go to the survival mechanism of Armenian and Chinese diaspora. Armenian and Chinese diaspora, the survival mechanism of this Chinese and Armenian diaspora in India uh, are shaped, you can say that are shaped by historical experiences like cultural prevention efforts, otherwise adaptation to strategies, their ability to integrate with while maintaining distinct identities with the Indian, I mean their ability to integrate with Indian culture, even though they had been maintaining distinct identities. All those things had been the base of the survival mechanism of Armenian diasporas in India, or both diasporas. For example, for Armenian diasporas, adapting to, or let us say, cultural and religious preservation, community hubs. So what does that mean? That means that the community, the Armenian community in India, has relied on religious institutions, particularly the churches, to preserve their identity. So to preserve the identity of the Armenian community in India, they predominantly depend on their churches. So the churches of Armenians historically played a central role, just not for worship. That's the main thing. It was just not for worship. Armenians were going to their churches not only for worship, but they had cultural activities. They also had educational gatherings. They also had social gatherings. So the church as a place of worship was not the only what's the activity the Armenians had undertook it. They developed the church, or the association in the church, or the membership in the church, beyond the worship, to cultural activities, educational programs, and such. So what does that help them? That has helped them in maintaining or developing a sense of belonging, or a more connectivity to the Armenian culture, even though their community was very less in India. For example, we can give an example of, say, the Armenian Church of Holy Nazareth Church of Calcutta, where they used to have religious ceremonies. They used to have cultural events. They used to develop cultural events. Mostly every month they used to have cultural events, and also they have developed uh, what is it called, this preservation of this cultural and historical documents of their olden age, when they came here, when they came to from Armenia to India for the trade, and those time those things during their trade, that those scribbled documents, those legal documents of those times, all those things were available to be seen in this church, unlike other churches in India. So they use the church as an identity preservation place, or the place from where their identity can be preserved. So that is their one survival mechanism in India as Armenians. Now, number two is adapting to Indian society, like intermarriage and social integrations. There are many Armenians in India who have integrated with the Indian society through intermarriage. There are many women married to Indian men, even Indian women married to Armenians are there. This has helped them to become more active, or their participation has increased more in the Indian social, economic, and political life. Or moreover, the Armenian diaspora in India had always had a blend. They always had a blend of both Indian culture to survive while they were still retaining their elements, some elements of their heritage. So they always try to be a part of Indian culture, keeping in mind they have a survival mechanism to keep their heritage as Armenians going on. Then the economic adaptations, the business and trade. This is the main area where the diaspora came, the Armenian diaspora came to India. It was business and trade. Traditionally, they are involved in business, sure, and the community adapted by investing in industries in India, and such as textile industries, uh, and then they help in maintaining their economic stability. In the same time, they helped in the host country like India to have them adapted to the to the economic stability of that country. Like they invested a lot in hospitality. They invested a lot in textile industries, and when they do the textile industry investment, at the same time they are doing the trading part of it, so that they have the economic stability coming out of their investment. At the same time, they are helping the economy of the host country to grow. Then, like education and culture preservation efforts, like language and culture or education, means though we know that we have already told that this Armenian community, they are very less in India, and the language is not widely spoken. The younger generations of Armenians in India, they hardly speak the language, and they either speak English with Hindi, a mix of it, or they speak Hindi. But the older generations, they still try or strive to keep the language, the language being taught to the younger generations. That is the reason why the children's hardly get the new generation of Armenians hardly get the language being language or the culture through the language being transmitted to them. They had been totally or more involved in the culture of the place where they are living. For example, uh, there were workshops. I remember it was in 2015 or 16. There were workshops made by this Armenian community in Calcutta, where through this church activities itself, and there was an effort to teach the younger generations of Armenians about the Armenian language, their heritage, and through cultural events, cultural workshops, and but what happened was it was a massive. Um, there was a massive participation, and later it declined. It declined because when they start learning about the heritage or learning about the more about the Armenian culture, and one that they had been already practiced, the younger generation could not merge into it. So it didn't work out. But however, there was a lot of changes that happened within the Armenian society during that period. So that kind of things are the survival mechanisms that Armenian diasporas have been taking in India. Also, there is something called maintaining strong networks. The Armenian community maintained a kind of strong network with their global diasporas, Armenian diasporas. Then they used to provide they used to provide a kind of what is it called, cultural activities. They used to provide funding for schools. There had been attempts of culture preservation activities, so on and so forth. There had been a lot of activities where Armenians diasporas got involved with Armenians in India as well to to increase or to educate the younger generation on their culture and how it is being preserved and framed. So Armenia, the Armenian diaspora had, over a period of time, they had been a part of Indian culture, but the sense of me being an Armenian by blood or by birth, that was the baseline for them to come up with certain mechanisms or come up with certain programs or certain other activities to make the younger generations of the Armenians understand more deeply onto their culture and to get adapted to it to an extent. So those are the survival mechanisms in India. Basic survival mechanisms Armenians are following in India. Any questions?
No, sir.
Do you think that there can be any other survival mechanisms? For
So these,
example, I'll give you an example. Imagine you are an Armenian and you belong to an younger generation of the Armenians. Can you see, other than this, any other survival mechanisms we may tend to adapt to keep our culture moving?
these are the pretty much things which I do if I was an Armenian person, younger generation. I might study the Indian culture and the language, and then I will I try to adapt in the India, basically. These are the pretty much your slide covered every survival mechanism for what think. I think.
Tell me one thing. If you were an Armenian, you said that you all these things will be the same which you will be doing. But can you think another way? You will learn Armenian language and you know Indian language. And will you be able to work out a kind of culture where both Armenian, it's a kind of cocktail culture of both Armenian and Indian mix, something like that? Will that work out in helping the Armenian diaspora to survive?
Sir, I will help the other Armenian person to survive. If I can speak Armenian and the Indian language, both the language, then I will eventually try to help the other Armenians as well to settle in this country. And I will use Armenian language more with them than the Indian language.
So you will use more of Armenian language with them than the Indian language. Okay, fair enough. Anyone else is there? No one is there, right? Only you are there.
Yes, sir.
Okay, no problem. Then we will go down to same way of Chinese diaspora survival mechanism in India. Same way, like what we said before, Chinese diasporas were basically into the culture and culinary preservations, which means food as cultural identity. That's the main thing. Food was there as a cultural identity. So that was one of the most notable survival mechanism of the Chinese community in India, and the preservation and promotion of Chinese Indian cuisines, no, the Chinese Indian cuisines uh, was one of the, what should we say, one of the culinary fusions that later become an integral part of the India's food culture. Okay, so this fusion of Chinese Indian cuisine allow the communities maintain their identity alongside being with the Indian community. So that is one example. Like, for example, there are hotels in restaurants in Kolkata where they serve Chinese Indian fusions. It's just not adding up spice, but they have added up many other things. Many other Indian food. The Indian taste has been taken into into a mixture with Chinese culinaries, and it become a hit. It become I mean, if you go to Kolkata, you can really have those kind of Chinese Indian fusions, and it looks pretty awesome. Then we come into the adaptation and integration, like the social mobility through commerce and industry. Uh, if we explain on that one, like the Chinese community, traditionally they are involved with India in business. And the business, most of the business, 90% of the business is stored restaurant ownerships or like food processing or maybe small scale manufacturing units. What happened is that over a time, uh, they got adapted basically with the Indian market or Indian lifestyles. And they started diversifying, diversifying into other sectors like textiles, maybe some into export business, and then even some into. I have seen a couple of Chinese being involved in uh, canning of fish, fin fish, all those things are there. This has allowed them to strive more in Indian economy. Uh, there are a lot of people, a lot of restaurant owners during and the period of in India's modernization. They shifted from the normal restaurant business to textile businesses, and a lot of export of textiles happened during that period, and many have turned into export business in resulting in new markets of exports coming. China market. There is a Chinese market, China market in Kolkata, which where you can go and see. If you go there, you have plenty of shops inside, managed mostly by Bengalis, but the main trades were done by the Chinese people, and you can get all these Chinese stuffs like the textile stuffs, the clothing, a lot of things you can get. So this is one way they are getting adapted and integrated to Indian culture. Then the language and identity maintenance, which means even not like Armenian younger generation, the Armenian younger generation have got deep into Indian culture. However, uh, here the Chinese community, though they have got adapted to the Indian culture, it was not something that very deep. They know they started learning they start talking in English, Hindi, Bengali, and even some people used to speak some South Indian languages as well. But they haven't gone deep into the Indian culture, like accepting certain religious festivals like Diwali. Armenians used to have Diwalis, those crackers and all. They used to do that. All those things they still maintain, not to get involved those areas. I mean, the Chinese diaspora didn't go that deep into Indian society. However, they maintained a level of manage maintenance with Indian community by learning their languages, by understanding more about their food, making them, uh, you know, making Chinese and Indian food cushions. All those things they have been doing it. For example, there are some schools in Calcutta, Chinese schools in Calcutta. They teach some language like Mandarin and Hakka languages. These institutions they used to teach them, even though the community is very less in the schools in Indian schools. Still, there are some Indian schools which used to teach these languages in Kolkata. Now, navigating to geopolitical challenges, as we said before, during these periods of geopolitical tensions between India and China government, especially after the Indo-Sino War in 1962, the the basic challenges the Chinese community faced was that it was they were discriminated. That is one thing. Second challenge was that they were often spied by the Indian government, thinking that they are spying over India. There had been incidents where they were denied their basic human rights. There were incidents where their properties were seized. All those things happened during this geopolitical uh, challenge. That's the geopolitical challenge. Even though during there were many people who were put in detention camps. All these things happened. Still, to recover from this, what the community often focused on rebuilding their businesses, and to do that, they still keep popularizing the Chinese food. They try to avoid avoid or overreact to certain political actions by India, and those things relatively help popularizing the tensions during this period. So that's another uh, way of survival mechanism of Chinese community in India. Then it comes as community solidarity and cultural events, just like what we have taught with Armenians. They too have festivals like the Chinese traditional Chinese festivals like Chinese New Year, the Mid Autumn festivals. These are important events in Chinese calendar or Chinese community, and those celebrations they try to do within their small community, and they open it for broader Indian public as well, which help understanding the Chinese culture. For example, there's in Calcutta, if you go during there's Chinese festivals during this festival period, you can see these dragon dances, and you can see parades of Chinese, cultural parades. Also, you can see a uh, lot of new traditional food. which we hardly see in the restaurants and daily serving, traditional foods. All these things we can find during the festival times of Chinese people, and that is one kind of survival mechanism. And as usual, the another one will be the networking and community support, like international and local networks. They have a very strong network, like the Armenian community. They have very strong international and local support, and even advocacy and cultural preservation groups. They work in very close knit. Even during the challenges posed by geopolitical tensions and social integration, these networks help them to ease or to be less affected by the tensions of the governments. So basically, the Armenians and the Chinese diaspora, their survival mechanism is more or less the same, provided, but there is one difference is that Chinese are more into uh, food or restaurant. So culinary preservation is their baseline of survival mechanism in India, whereas Armenians, they are more into the trade, businesses and trades of textiles, and those things are the main area of survivals for Armenians. Sorry, yes, Armenians. Anything else in this topic?
No, so
So if we look into the common survival strategies of both communities, we can say that the common survival strategies are that the cultural integration and preservation. Both the Armenian and Chinese communities have integrated basically to the Indian community or Indian society through their customs and local languages. Then they have economic adaptations. Both communities they try to get economically adapted to Indian diverse market, which is very important again. And then the community networks, both diasporas, they have strong community networks that ties beyond the borders. Okay, that helps them in their survival mechanism in India. Then we can even say yes to an extent of education and language efforts. Both communities they were taking extensive efforts to keep the language known or spoken by the younger generations. So these are the common survival strategies for both communities. Now we will go to economic contributions of Chinese and Armenian diaspora. So the basic thing here is the Armenian diaspora. They have contributed in the trade and commerce, cultural contributions, and philanthropy. What are the trade and commerce? If you go back to history, Armenians, as we said before, are known to be entrepreneurial results or spirits, and they played a key role in forming trade routes between India and the Middle East and the European countries. And this we have studied in the before slides also, that during Mughal period itself, they had been good in establishing this kind of trades. Then they have established their business into textiles, spices, and even cotton trades also, and other goods which they marketed through these trade routes which they have found out to European countries and elsewhere. Also, there had been uh, a notable presence in uh, in in developing the port hubs in India, where the trade and commerce has actually helped the Armenians to grow up their connections or extending their connections to Europe and Central Asian countries. Number B is the cultural contributions. Here, when we go back on what we studied, we can understand that the in the cultural contributions, the remains of their cultures, or the architectural influences are all dates back to somewhere in 18th century, and it dates back to 18th century onto the Church of Nazareth in Calcutta. So the church had played a pivotal role in in this diaspora, having their what to say, having their cultural identity preserved, and then they established some educational and cultural institutions. Uh, then the multicultural fabrics of India, all those things are the cultural contributions they have. Philanthropically, they had involved in a lot of charitable activities. They had been supporting schools, they were supporting hospitals, and some other social causes. They were also basically patrons of educational institutions, especially we can have this institution somewhere in Agra sites, and then also in Calcutta and even in Chennai. And they still have these institutions there. So that's another way they have contributed economically to India, and their stand, their economic viability in India is being supported by these things. On the other side, if we come to China, entrepreneurship and manufacturing. Chinese are now the migrants who are in Kolkata, where the concentration of Chinese nationalities are more, diaspora is more, I should say. They are involved in manufacturing, particularly in the productions of goods such as leather products, handicrafts, or textile items. And then these Chinese owned their own businesses in India. They have they have grown to contribute the local industries as well as Chinese cuisines. So that is one area. The other one is some Chinese families started operating, or sorry, started manufacturing of toys, toys, especially in Calcutta, promoting toy items, toy manufacturings, contributing to the local economy. So that's part A of it. And the Chinese cuisine, as we have said, we discussed this several times. One of the most notable and economic impact we can say is the Chinese cuisine, and how the Chinese restaurants, the street foods, especially in the metropolitan cities, it created thousands of jobs. and it contributed a lot to the food and hospitality industries across India. Then we have the cultural and social integration. Here we can say that the Chinese community did enrich Indian culture diversity too, particularly uh, in terms of festivals or food and traditional practices. Like Indian society always promoted kind of cross-cultural exchange and understanding of the Indian social fabrics with the Chinese social enhancement with the Indian society. So Chinese community has, we can say that they have enriched to an extent of Indian culture. Then we have the small scale business contributions, like what I said, the toy business, um, the presence of retail shops or manufacturing units in Kolkata where they make small toys, leather bags, even shoes, jackets, all those things. This business served the local population, but not only served the local population, but also they brought in a huge contribution to the Indian society. Is there anything that is there? Anushka, anything is there? Okay, we will wind up. Before we have a final thought, like reflecting on how these diasporic communities have enriched India's cultural diversity, that's what we can think about. And for future, considering future prospects of remaining diasporic communities in evolving global context. So that's what we can do in the future. With that, we end the slides. There is a chat. Okay. Anything else? Any questions, Karan?
नो सर, मैं सर अभी जस्ट 10 मिनट पहले जुड़ा हूँ, तो सर मैं मेरे को थोड़ा समझ में नहीं आ पाया है, तो मैं इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग देखूंगा दोबारा से।
ठीक है, अगर कुछ होगा तो मेरे को मेल कर देना, ठीक है?
जी सर।
Sadaji, we can wind it up, right?
Okay. Okay, Ranju.
I'll call you Sadaji in the evening.
हाँ. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.